Good afternoon and welcome to the last of our fall season of Writers Festival Writers Series events. This could be the one event in December that you attend where you don't have to cook, clean, shop, wrap, return anything, or feel guilty about who you left off your Christmas list. So we're glad you could join us and welcome. Please turn off your cell phones, please. As always, we're going to thank some people. First and foremost, the founder of our Writers Festival, Jamie Kabler. Our city council. Without our city, we couldn't do this event or the entire Writers Festival in general. So please welcome Mayor Lynn Mulatto. City Council Member Eve Fromberg-Edelstein, City Council Member Ted Weil, City Council Member Steve Downs, and his lovely wife, Jerry Downs. Thank you all. The staff here is fabulous. I think most of you that come on a regular basis know what an amazing library we have. We always thank all our staff. Our AV guys up in the booth that make me look and sound good. Jordan Schnitzer, who underwrites the entire Writers Series event. Thank you to Jordan. His generosity is over the moon. And to all our angels who underwrite 90% of our festival, we thank you so very much. After the presentation, like always, there'll be a signing. If you line up against this wall, Brandt will be glad to sign your books and talk to you for a little bit. While you're lining up against the wall, you might notice all of the books along this wall are authors coming to our 2026 festival. We're pretty proud of the list. So we have spring writers events also. They start after the festival is over. I believe they start in March. Please look on our website and you'll find out all about those. And also, during our festival this year, if you don't have tickets, please sign up on our website to be on our mailing list. You will be able to stream the entire event for free from the comfort of your home, your living room, your computer, even your cell phone. So please do that. Okay, on to today's program. We're delighted to welcome Brant MacDuff, who is the author of the book you have in your lap, The Shotgun Conservationist. In this engaging and thoughtful book, Brandt explores the intersection of tradition, ethics, and land stewardship, offering a fresh perspective on conservation through the world of upland hunting. It's not just about sport. It's about responsibility to the land, to wildlife, and to the future. So please help me welcome Brant MacDuff.
Thank you. Thank you, Debbie. Thank you. Thank you, Debbie. Thank you to the Writers Festival for having me, this incredible facility. I've really been blown away by it. I just couldn't believe it getting the tour. This is an incredible facility and programming, and I'm really honored and delighted to be a part of it. And thank you guys for coming out. Just like Debbie said, there's a lot going on this time of year, so I appreciate you taking the time. But now we have a lot of work to do because I've got about 90 minutes worth of material and only 50 minutes to get through it. So I'm going to start talking fast, so pay attention. So who am I? I'm Brant MacDuff. What do? I study wildlife conservation strategy and economics. I also study conservation history and taxidermy history, which is a thing. Now, what do I do with that? What does that mean? Well, I give a lot of lectures and write about a bunch of topics related to the intersections of that information and material. So conservation, conservation history, conservation economics, and conservation strategy. And I figured because my book is just like a little bit of a hodgepodge of all those things, that's what I'm going to do today and give you a little bit of a hodgepodge of that conservation strategy and economics and history and fun stories and all kinds of things about, the weirdos associated with conservation history. We're going to start off with the most attractive one. I just came back from 3 weeks in Mongolia studying with the studying eagle hunting and hunting foxes with eagles, riding out with the eagle hunters and looking for snow leopard tracks. And the purpose for my end of that trip, aside from having so much fun and getting awesome photos like this, was so that I could study, is there a possibility of creating a small economic opportunity like a safari culture for people to get further afield in Mongolia and experience the nomadic lifestyle like the people have been living there for thousands of years, bring them a little extra economic opportunity while also creating value for the lifestyle that they live. Instead, a lot of people tend to move closer and closer to the cities, into the suburbs, and they lose that nomadic lifestyle. And so how can we bring people a little bit more economic opportunity by just doing the stuff they already do? And that's kind of the work I do. A really topical example would be Christmas trees. So at first blush, you might think, oh, okay, well, I'm going to get a fake Christmas tree, and then I can reuse it year after year after year. But and if we get a real Christmas tree, well, that must be bad because then we're cutting down a Christmas tree, right? But you can't think about it that way. You have to think about, oh, okay, actually, now there is economic opportunity in growing trees. That's really, really good. I'm really thrilled that someone out there is making money off of growing trees as opposed to producing plastic. So that's kind of the stuff that I look at, but I do it with wildlife. So these bison, I would so much rather everyone start eating way more bison. Add more bison into your diet. If you see bison at the grocery store, buy more bison. Because having bison at the grocery store means that there's a market for bison on the landscape. And that's what I want. I want to see more bison on the landscape. They're really good for the soil. The American West, the plains land, that needs bison to churn up the soil and create those micro ecosystems and create a carbon sink. And I would much rather people be eating bison than buying some kind of processed soy patty that came out of a monocrop farm that's owned by the Nestle Corporation. So go buy your bison. Now, can we stretch that to other materials? If we think about animals and meat, what about textiles? What about leather and fur? People think, oh, okay, fur and trapping, that's a little far beyond what I was prepared to be okay with. But when you think about the alternatives, what are those alternatives? They're synthetics. What is synthetic? Synthetic is fake. Synthetic mostly just means plastic. So when you buy faux fur, you are buying plastic that came out of an oil refinery. And if I can buy some fur leather that came from Canada or Canadian trapper or Western trapper, that is buying into a system that pays into conservation structures in America, in Canada, and puts value on those landscapes and those animals continuing to exist. So in that same vein is land use, and that's what I look at a lot. Where can we put the value of the land as just being habitat? So I would take an elk hunter 100 times over because the elk hunter's whole job is to go into the woods and come out of the woods without disturbing anything. No trails, leave no trace, get in and out without being seen or noticed. Maybe they get an elk. Statistically, they don't. But they've still put a lot of money into that conservation funding structure. Whereas when we have something like a ski lodge, well, now we've got to build more and more infrastructure to support all the people, and that's now an entire winter range that cannot be used by wildlife. So when you extend that, that happens all over the world. This is in Africa, where this is a little hunting lodge. There's 4 little structures at the bottom of that valley, and the hunters that go there and hunt, they support the renting, basically, of that entire landscape to be used as habitat for the animals, because the animals are really valuable, and that means the habitat is really valuable. What happens when the animals are not valuable? Well, then the habitat they live in isn't really valuable. We can turn that into something else, like a mine. So this mine will never be anything else. It's toast. That landscape, these are very similar landscapes in southern Africa, and that place is just done for. But the animals, they reproduce every year, every 2 years, and we can make more of them. They're very sustainable, whereas that landscape is now done for. So for me, that happened in a really personal way. I thought, okay, well, if I'm just going to start with myself, how can I look at that same structure? I didn't want my money to go to supporting this guy or supporting this structure that I didn't like. I wanted my money, instead of supporting some billion-dollar conglomerate of which there's like 4 companies that run all the food we eat, how could I spend my money and support Mother Nature and support the stuff that nature does, just being nature? And was there a way for me to do that? So I invented hunting. You're welcome. I wrote a book about it. It's a big hit, as you can see. That's kind of how the book came about. But how did I get to that point in the very beginning? Well, it's just because I love animals. I'm really crazy about animals. I've been nuts about animals since I was a little kid, and I wanted to be a shark biologist or a bear biologist. I couldn't decide on an animal. I decided I just wanted to save them all. So how could I do that? And that began a long time ago at the American Museum of Natural History, and at natural history museums in general. For me, I really loved natural history museums. I liked them more than zoos. I liked that I could see an animal displaying some sort of natural movement in what looked like its natural habitat. I always found them very dynamic and fascinating. And so that brings us to, now we're going way back, that brings us to the American Museum of Natural History, which is my local hometown museum and really one of the most incredible natural history museums in the world. And it was founded in this guy's living room. Does anyone know who that is? We don't have enough time. I'm going to tell you. So this is Teddy Roosevelt's dad. And Theodore Roosevelt, he was a great outdoorsman. He loved the outdoors, and he passed that on to his son, but he loved the outdoors, and more importantly than loving the outdoors, he hated market hunting. So market hunting, this is an old wild game market in Chicago. It's really, the market is beautiful. I mean, if it wasn't so horribly unsustainable, it would be an amazing place to shop. Look at that. There's all of these lobsters, and there's ducks, and there's venison, and there's fish, and there's all kinds of stuff. But market hunting would be when you went out into the woods and you shot or caught as much of whatever it was you could get, and then you bring it back to market to sell. The only problem is that is very unsustainable because you're just taking, and nothing is going back. So this is how they used to capture passenger pigeons. They had a bunch of ways of doing it, but this is one of them. And they would cut down trees. They would create these giant swinging mechanisms that would just capture a whole shit ton of birds at once, and then they'd package them up in boxes, and then they'd send the boxes back to the city. This is a punt gun. It is basically a tiny cannon that went on the front of your punt boat, and you could just shoot a whole mess of ducks at once. It was pretty unfair. You know, the animals didn't have much of a chance. And this is actually where we get the term sport and trophy from. Sport and trophy are actually really, really good, positive words. They came out of wanting to end market hunting. So market hunting, again, you're going out in the woods and you're taking as much of and whatever crossed your path. So it didn't matter if the animal was a male or a female or old or young. It didn't matter if you took 1 or 20 or all of them that you could see. You just took as much as you could to bring back to market. Whereas when that started to shift was when people said, you know what, this is unsustainable. You can't just keep taking and taking this much. And the idea of sport is not sport, a game like soccer. Sport comes from the word sporting, like giving the animal a sporting chance at escaping you, which was something that they did not have against the market hunters. So going out with just a shotgun instead of these giant cannons. and being very selective. Selectivity is where we get the term trophy. It is a trophy because it was selected and sought after as a goal, as opposed to, again, anything and everything. So saying, I'm not going to shoot that female, or I'm not going to shoot that young buck, he's too young, we need him to get old and pass on his genetics. I'm just going to focus on that one older male that has already passed on his genes. So that's where the term trophy comes from. It was selecting one instead of just taking everything. Now, let's get back to the founding of the museum in T.R. Sr.'s living room. Now, this is T.R. Sr.'s living room right up there, and it's looking down onto Union Square in New York, and this is actually Abraham Lincoln's funeral procession that we're looking at. And if you look up in that open window, you'll see two little kids. One of them is Teddy Roosevelt at 7 years old, looking out of his window at Abraham Lincoln's funeral procession. It has nothing to do with my lecture. It's just a really cool photo. All right, now, moving into TR, and as we know him as a naturalist, also, if you haven't read this book, I highly recommend it. It's a lot of fun, and it's just laser-focused on Teddy's history as a naturalist. Teddy desperately wanted to be a museum naturalist. He wanted to go out into the woods and have adventures all over the world and chasing and hunting animals and bringing them back to museums and studying them. That's what he wanted to do with his life. But just as he got to Harvard and he said, I want to be this rough and tumble museum naturalist and bring science and nature to the world, Harvard said, oh, we don't do that anymore. Nature and science are studied under a microscope. That's how science is done. And so microscopes were like the hot new thing, so they just thought like microscopes, like, yeah, I don't know, microscope. And it was like the AI of the day, like, I don't know, AI. So microscopes, they just thought would be everything. And it really didn't take them that long to realize, oh yeah, it's really tough to study a rhinoceros under a microscope. So it was just that time that Teddy got to Harvard that he's like, I can't be a museum naturalist? Well, that sucks. I guess I'll be president of the United States instead. But just 27 years after TR was born, this guy, Roy Chapman Andrews, is exactly the type of museum naturalist that TR really wanted to be. He was having adventures all over the world and studying animals. He's the real-life inspiration for Indiana Jones. But lucky for us, Teddy became president instead. And he did get to have a lot of cool, wild trips and stories, and he was a prolific writer. He wrote a bunch about these stories. One of the books he wrote was this one, Hunting Trips of a Ranchman. And so he writes this book about his adventures out west, and it gets reviewed in Forest and Stream, which was sort of the precursor to Field and Stream. And it gets kind of a, like, meh review. And so Teddy's pissed. So he goes to the offices of Field and Stream, and he's like, who is this guy? He goes to pick a fight, and he meets George Bird Grinnell. Now, George Bird Grinnell is, he should be as famous as TR for the work that he did in conservation. They get to talking, and Teddy realizes that this guy has chops. He lived out west with the Plains Indians, and he really knew his stuff. There's some other amazing books about George Bird Grinnell that I definitely recommend. And so instead of fighting, they just end up talking and becoming like best friends. It is the most important meet cute in all of conservation history. So they become buddies, and they found the Boone and Crockett Club at the museum. Now, the Boone and Crockett Club is America's oldest wildlife conservation group, and they're still going today. And if you go to the museum, you'll see in the brown bear exhibit was donated by the Boone and Crockett group. And one of the things that we got out of BNC was a further understanding of that idea of fairness and sport. And we call it, and they call it, fair chase. So if you're familiar with the story of Teddy and the bear, he was out once. He was on a hunting trip, and a guide told him, hey, there's a bear over, around the corner there. And he said, what? So he grabs his rifle, and he goes to find this bear. And he sees there's this juvenile bear tied to a tree, and it's injured. And he's like, are you kidding me? He's like, I'm not going to shoot this bear. What are you, crazy? And the story got around town that there was this bear that Teddy wasn't going to shoot. It wasn't fair. It was injured. It was tied to a tree. That wasn't sporting. That wasn't fair. And so the story gets around, and a very enterprising woman makes a cute little stuffed animal bear and calls it the teddy bear. And this is where we get that from. I know people, I always get the awes on that one. And now if you go to the museum and you're downstairs, you'll see this wonderful statue that everyone gets their picture taken with of Teddy, and he is right in front of those Alaska brown bears that were donated by the Boone and Crockett Club. Now, at the same time around the museum, we have this guy, Frank Chapman. Frank Chapman, very cool dude. He was an ornithologist for the AMNH, and he noticed a worrying trend. He noticed that there were a lot of ladies walking around with feathers on their clothing, mostly in their hats. They had all sorts of whole taxidermied birds on their hats. It was high fashion at the time. And so he goes out with a pen and paper out onto Fifth Avenue, and he counts 542 hats that have feathers on them. And of those hats, he counts over 40 different species of bird represented on them. Now, he knows that this is unsustainable, but he also knows that, this is the fashion of the time, and people didn't really know better. It was very common practice to go be a collector, to be an amateur naturalist. You would go out and you would look for shells, or maybe you collected eggs, or ferns, or birds, or moths, or bugs. It was a really normal and, I think, great pastime. The only problem was it was entirely unsustainable. People didn't really understand about sustainability because until the passenger pigeon and even after, they really didn't believe that people could make an animal go extinct. It just didn't seem plausible to them. So Chapman and George Bird Gunnell write this article for Forest and Stream. The article is called The Audubon Society, and they write about what's happening to the birds. Now, in Boston, these women, Harriet Hemingway and Minna Hall, they read this article and they say, quote, it was something like, holy shit. And so they read this article and they feel terrible about what's happening to the birds, and they had no idea. They like the bird hats as well, and they just had no idea that it was such a problem for the birds. So what they start doing is hosting these high society tea parties. And at these tea parties, they use the opportunity to talk to the other women who in attendance and tell them what's happening with the birds and how unsustainable this is. And they start spreading the word across the country. They actually paved the way for the Audubon Society to take root in Massachusetts and then become a nationwide society. It's because of the two of them. This is the Cuthbert Rookery at the AMNH, and these are the types of birds in southern Florida that were most targeted for a lot of bird feather hats, and they were in real danger of becoming extinct. This is when Teddy says, okay, well, we got to do something. We got to stop this, and we end up creating Pelican Island. Pelican Island is our very first national wildlife refuge. It's the first time we say we're going to set aside a piece of land specifically for these animals. And it paves the way for our national wildlife refuge system. And most of the way that system gets paid for is partly with one of these. This is a duck stamp. It's officially called the Migratory Bird Hunting and Conservation Stamp. We just call it a duck stamp. And it was made by and for hunters to pump money back into wildlife and wildland conservation. But anybody can buy one. If we had the time, I would bring up the lights and make you all buy a duck stamp on your phone right now. You can go get one from your post office or online. They're $25, and 98 cents of every one of those dollars goes directly to the purchase and upkeep of wild land conservation. So because the US government doesn't really have like a brick and mortar store where you can buy stuff to support the programs that you like, the post office kind of becomes the closest thing. So you're directly paying the government to buy up these lands and save them for wildlife. Now, another diorama at the museum that's going to bring us to one of our first, one of my favorite characters. This is the Mountain Nyala diorama. It's a beautiful diorama, these fabulous painted ones on the background. If you don't know about Nyala, they're very cool animals. This one with the fancy pants and everything, that's actually the common Nyala, but it was these mountain Nyala that were lesser known to science. They weren't really known to science at all until 1908. And this is where our first real character comes in. This is Gertrude Sanford, later Gertrude Sanford Legendre. And I mean, look, you can already tell she's fabulous. But Gertrude started hunting with her father when she was 19 years old. This is her smoking a dart with her pet gibbon in the middle of the African bush. I mean, she's fucking cool, right? All right, so anyway, she starts hunting with her dad when she's 19. They hunt all over the West. They go to Alaska. She goes on her first safari in 1927. And when she comes back, she is itching to lead her own museum expedition. So at 26 years old, she marches into Henry Osborne's office. He was the president of the museum. And she says, I will find you your Nyala. Just send me to Africa. I want my own expedition. And he says, kid, if you can raise $30,000, then yeah, sure. Now, $30,000 at the time was over $500,000 today. So she says, fine, I will. And then she marches into her father's office and says, Dad, can I have $30,000? And he says, sure. So she's on her way. So she heads off and she arrives in Ethiopia. In Ethiopia, she meets Emperor Selassie, who is so taken with this lady adventurer that he gifts her his prized mule and this wonderful saddle. Unfortunately, she really liked to walk everywhere, but she didn't tell him that. Now, on this expedition, she meets Sidney Legendre, and they would fall in love and get married. It's very sweet. Let's have a moment of silence for just how cool that photograph is. Just how desperately I want to be them. Oh, my God. Now, she gets back from this safari. She's successful. They find the Nyala. It's a great success. They bring back specimens for the museum. They make all kinds of discoveries. She gets back from this African museum expedition, and she's bored. You know, what could possibly follow that? So she becomes a spy for the OSS during World War II. She is captured by the Nazis. The drawing in the middle was an illustration one of her captors made of her. And then she escapes. She escapes and goes right back to being fabulous. Katharine Hepburn's character in Holiday is based off her, and there are some other books and stories about Gertie if you want to know more. If anyone is interested in making a limited television series about Gertie, please approach me after the lecture. I wish I held the rights to her story because it's amazing. So anytime you see the Nyala, please think of Gertie. But moving on to these grizzly bears. These are the grizzly bears at the AMNH, and wonderful little diorama. You can see Mama Grizzly is pulling up a log there, and she's going to show her cubs how you find grubs and stuff inside the log. This is what it looked like before it was completed. You can see they haven't put in any of the foreground yet, any of the rocks or anything like that. Well, there was this fellow working at the museum, and he thought, you know what? This moment presents a unique opportunity that I really need to take advantage of. So he did. This is Ray DeLuca, and he came to work one day with a tattered shirt and some ketchup and said, I am going to take the best Christmas card photo you've ever seen. And so here's back to back, here's the completed bit and the picture that Ray took. Now, by the time that this photo was really making the round, he couldn't post it on Instagram, so it took a while for the photo to make the rounds. But when it did, he was starting to get in a lot of trouble from the museum, and they were going to fire him. He was fighting in World War II, and they're like, when that kid comes back, he's toast. And they were like, what, are you kidding me? So he comes back, and of course, he's a hero. They don't fire him. He goes on to work at the museum for many more years. But that lets me talk about grizzly bears. So grizzly bears, right now there's talks about delisting some animals. Animals get delisted all the time, but the ones that we hear about that really make the news are the ones that we have connection to those charismatic megafauna like grizzly bears or wolves. What we have to remember is that it's really, really good when animals get delisted. Shout out to the Roanoke log perch for getting delisted this year. Did that all make the headlines for you guys? But good for him. All of the time and money and resources that went into the Roanoke log perch can now go to a different species that really needs that help. So we have to remember that the ESA is great, it does amazing work, but we want to delist those animals. That's the whole point. So when animals come up for delisting, who's making those decisions? It's our U.S. state and federal wildlife biologists deciding if they have met their recovery details. And that brings me to ballot box biology, which is truly the thing that keeps me up nights the most. Ballot box biology is when we take any kind of scientific issue and special interest groups manage to get it into a ballot box situation so that the average voter can just tick a box and vote on it. This really terrifies me because if you think about other sciences, if there was something on your ballot that said, okay, we've just listed this mathematical equation, do you think that's the one that we should use to send our next rover to get to Mars? That would be pretty freaky. They're like, well, we could use this one particular equation, but we think maybe there's going to be an asteroid field. And so you would never expect to see that on a ballot box because we understand that we have professionals that know a hell of a lot more math than I do, and they figure out those flight patterns. Well, the same thing happens in biology. The difference is people don't have a lot of emotional connection to mathematical equations, but they do have a lot of emotional connection to animals. And that's a good thing. I can't tell you of anyone who has devoted their life to wildlife conservation and the study of biology and ecology that doesn't love animals. So there's emotions for these critters on both sides, but what we have done historically in this country is leave those types of decisions up to our state and federal wildlife biologists. And so that's kind of something that I am working on constantly, is a lot of public education around wildlife biology and ecology and where we get that information and how we make decisions on wildlife conservation and management. Okay, you were good through that, thank you. We're gonna get back to the weirdos. This is Carl Akeley. Carl Akeley, I'm this close to getting a tattoo of Carl Akeley's face on my ass. He's so cool and fun. So Carl is responsible, if you've ever been to the AMNH, Carl is responsible for the Africa Hall. And he's got there's so many stories. I really can't tell you enough about this guy, Carl Akeley. He's got wild stories. This is a guy who was famous while he was alive for all of the crazy adventures he was having around the world for museums and things like that. This is him and that large trumpeting elephant. And so one time he was out in Africa and he was with his crew, and this rogue bull elephant comes right out of the jungle. Now you think, I don't know how you get snuck up on by an elephant, but they are very, very quiet. They have these big paddy feet that absorb the shock of their body as they move. And as a result, they're actually pretty quiet when they walk around. So this elephant comes out of the bush, and no one's prepared for it. Akeley is trying to get a shot off, but his gun jams, and this elephant starts charging everybody. Now, Akeley, in this line of work, he had actually practiced being gored by an elephant. He figured, you're in this line of work long enough, you're probably going to get gored by an elephant. That's just practical. So he was actually ready, and as the elephant got closer to him, he actually jumps up in between the elephant's tusks and wraps his arms around the tusks. And as the elephant is not stupid, he starts taking his head and smashing it into the ground. But the tusks can't go through the dirt, so Akeley's kind of protected between the two of them. But he's getting smushed. The rest of his crew are like trying to scare off the elephant. The elephant gets pissed at them, and he turns around and he's like, okay, you want some of this? And so he goes after them. And so the crew scatters. And Akeley is left there on the ground for 5 hours until his crew comes back to him. So the crew comes back to him, they see him there, lying there on the ground, and they're like, oh my God, that's terrible. He was such a cool guy. Wow. And, meanwhile, he's like, I'm alive. And so he's trying to tell them that he's alive, and they realize he's alive, and they're, oh my God. So they scoop him up, they bring him back to camp. He spends weeks and weeks and weeks in camp recovering from being gored by an elephant, and he uses every moment of this time to mathematically plot out the size and shape of the entire Africa Hall, just thinking like, wow, elephants are so cool. I am going to create a cathedral to elephants, and hopefully people will be as interested in them and love them as much as I do. Akeley was a great taxidermist, but more than that, he was really a great inventor. He wanted to understand the way these animals moved. He understood that the understanding of anatomy was really how you get the best taxidermy. It can't just be this sort of stiff, motionless cabinet. It has to be in motion and look natural. So something that always bothered him while he was on safari was the fact that when you would go out there, they would have photographers and painters, but he couldn't get motion. He couldn't get motion pictures of these animals, and that really bugged him. Now, they did have motion picture cameras at the time, of course, but they were enormous, and you just wouldn't be able to bring them on safari. You wouldn't be able to be like, oh, look, there's something, and then go back to the thing and put it together and wheel it. It would have been impractical. So he figures, okay, I want to have a little mobile motion picture camera. I guess I better invent it. And he did. He invented the first mobile motion picture camera just so that he could watch animals move and have those recordings to see the movements of their bodies so that his taxidermy would be more realistic. He invented all kinds of stuff for the U.S. Navy, different types of spotlights. He invented this gizmo that we used to create the Panama Canal, all kinds of stuff. These are the leopards at the AMNH, and the leopards I'm talking about are actually at the Field Museum in Chicago. But I love this diorama because Mom is clearly trying to teach her cub how to hunt bush pigs, but he's just not paying attention at all. He's on TikTok. And so anyway, Akeley is out there, and he goes out one day, and he just kind of feels weird. And he's like, you know what? I think something is stalking me. And he looks around and he sees a leopard in the grass. And the leopard sees him seeing him. And when that happens, the leopard starts to charge him. So the leopard is charging him, and the leopard's coming really fast. So Akeley does manage to get a shot off, but it's not very good. He hits him in the foot. And the leopard is mid-leap, and Akeley knows he's going to go for his throat, so he's got to protect his throat. So he throws his arm up to protect his throat. The leopard latches onto him, and Akeley wraps his arm around the leopard's neck, and they start wrestling in the dirt. Well, they're wrestling, and in all of Akeley's free time, he thinks, I probably can't take my arm out of a leopard's mouth, so what do I do? So instead, he does the opposite. He twists his arm into the leopard's throat and keeps pushing it while he is strangling the leopard. And he chokes the leopard to death with his bare hands. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. That's a small leopard. You strangle a leopard to death with your bare hands, and then we can have a conversation about that. So he gets back to camp. He's got the leopard on one shoulder, and he's just bleeding everywhere. He gets into camp, and it's like a record scratch. Everyone's like, oh. And he says, I have survived the leopard attack, but I may not survive infection. So I want every single drop of antiseptics that we have at camp. And so everyone scatters, and they go grab stuff, and they start injecting all of the tooth marks and claw marks all over his body. And he said at one point, they would inject one tooth mark, and antiseptic would squirt out of another. Yeah. And the only thing Akeley said about it was, by the end of it, I had rather wished the leopard won. He was a very cool customer. his favorite were the gorillas. He loved the mountain gorillas. And it's actually because of Akeley that we have Virunga National Park. Now, in the 1920s, this guy understood that this was a special landscape and that it needed protections then. He really understood that, just seeing that and spending time with the gorillas. Now, if you're familiar with Jane Goodall, who we lost recently, you may also be familiar with Dr. Diane Fossey. So if Dr. Jane Goodall was studying chimps, Dr. Diane Fossey was studying gorillas. And she really loved Akeley because she was flabbergasted by the fact that he could see that so early in the 1920s, that those landscapes that the gorillas relied on needed protections even back then. And she also liked that he was very responsible for changing the way people thought about gorillas. Because at the time they were thought of as just monsters. And he said, no, they're very gentle, intelligent creatures. If you haven't seen the movie Gorillas in the Mist, definitely check it out if you want to cry yourself to sleep for the rest of your life. This is Akeley's gorilla diorama, and that's a real place. It's actually where he is buried in Africa. All of those dioramas, they're not just an approximation of what that landscape might have looked like. Every single one of them is a real place, the way it would have looked when they were standing there taking a photo. And the last guy I'm going to talk about is this guy, Belmore Brown. Belmore Brown, also really cool adventurer, hunter, taxidermist. He did a little bit of taxidermy, but he was more a painter. And he actually plotted new courses up what was Mount McKinley, now Denali. He created these gorgeous paintings, really great with snowscapes. He loved the snow, cold weather, so amazing paintings of ice and snow. This is him later in life painting the background for the mountain goat diorama. And then later, this is Denali, and these are the doll sheep. That's a friend of mine, Bethany. She's working on the 2012 restoration of those dioramas. Her little moccasin slippers are actually really important, and we wear them inside the dioramas because they don't damage the ground. But just like Akeley, it was the same story. He saw this landscape and he said, this is a landscape that really needs protections. So even then, paving the way for Denali to become a protected space. And then here is Belmore painting that background, bringing us back to those brown bears that we saw at the beginning that were donated by the Boone and Crockett Club. Now, something I want you to keep in mind is, you see this, that's Belmore next to that brown bear. And if you remember when we were talking about Ray was fighting a grizzly bear. So look at those two skulls. The little skull is a grizzly bear. The big skull is an Alaskan brown bear. That is the difference between those. Now, if we have any California wine snobs, you might be familiar with the difference between champagne and sparkling wine. Well, it's the same thing with bears. If you've ever heard the term Kodiak bears only come from Kodiak Island. If you're in Unimak Island, you are also going to see some big bears, but those are Unimak bears. So collectively, we just call them Alaska brown bears or coastal Alaskan brown bears because they achieve that enormous size living on the coast and just gorging themselves on fish all year, whereas the bears that live in the interior are generally a little smaller. Now, this is before the 2012 restoration. They were really, really bleached out. A lot of the animals there are really bleached out from what were the fluorescent lights. The fluorescent lights really bleach out their hair. And so we've replaced all the lights. Now they are LEDs, which do not bleach out their hair. And just to name drop George Dante, I'm sure you know the most famous museum taxidermist. This is George Dante, and he is working on restoring that brown bear that we saw Belmore painting the background of. And if you look here, you can see, can you see the parts that haven't been airbrushed yet? And you can see that straight line and how much better they look. So there's no other way into these dioramas other than through that glass. They wanted them to be, as much as possible, hermetically sealed, and it really, really worked. The lights were an issue, and they could change the lights. As you see before, that panel can be accessed from the other side. So you can change the lights without having to go in. But to get inside a diorama, you have to bring down the glass. And at the AMNH, that's a big deal, because there are no longer entrances to the museum big enough to bring in a new piece of glass if it breaks. So it's a big deal when the glass comes down. And then we go into the diorama, it can all be cleaned and airbrushed and fixed, and then the glass goes back up. And then this is them today. So the fish was repainted, and they got airbrushed, and everything got cleaned and spruced up, and that happened in 2011, 2012, just for the downstairs. So we've done a big roundabout, starting and ending with bears. That was my little framing device there. But the thing I want to leave you with is just that, I know they're just the cutest, is just remembering that it is these people who we don't often associate with conservation, these hunters and taxidermists and are fantastic wildlife biologists and ecologists that work for our state and federal fish and wildlife agencies. These are people who have devoted their entire lives to animals and their habitats, and I guarantee you they are just as emotionally connected to these animals as anyone else possibly could be. And so even though they seem like maybe not at first blush would you have thought of a hunter or a taxidermist as wildlife's best friend, I hope maybe I've given you just a little bit of a different way to think about these people and how they relate to animals. That was certainly a big awakening for me, going from someone who was vehemently anti-hunting as a little kid to someone who now teaches people to hunt and be responsible for their own food sources and get connected to nature and really be a part of it as opposed to seeing themselves outside of it. I really appreciate all of you taking the time to be here and to listen to me, and I hope to talk with you after. Thank you for having me. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.